Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. On a recent visit to my local hobby shop, I spotted these 4 flat cars in the $1 bin. In today's video, I'll show you how I remake these fairly ordinary models into showpieces for my layout. It takes less than a minute to disassemble these cars. Just pop off and discard the truck coupler assembly, then pry the deck tabs away from the body one pair at a time, working along the length of the car. Once the deck is free, the weight falls out. It is held in place by pins on the underside of the deck. The bulkhead flat car comes apart the same way. This model just uses a bulkhead casting in place of the wood deck casting. I have no use for this bulkhead. I'll probably just discard it. One of the 4 cars had been glued together at the deck tabs. It took a little more effort to chip away the glue, but it came apart fairly easily. Then it was just a matter of scraping away the remaining glue. Once all 4 cars had been disassembled, I started as I always do, by carving away the cast-on details that I will eventually replace with separate parts. First is the brake wheel mount. It's a little hard to see, but the body casting actually had the brake wheel cast on the wrong end of the car. Surprisingly, the chain that connects the brake wheel to the brake rods was cast on the correct end of the car underbody. Next, I cut away the stirrup steps and trimmed the cast-on portions off of the car body. Finally, I cut away the 8 cast-on hand grabs. Next, I fabricated a wooden deck to replace the bulkhead deck. I used a piece of evergreen V-groove siding I had on hand. As you can see, I didn't have a long enough piece, so I glued 2 shorter pieces to a full-length piece of 10/1000 inch styrene. Once I had the replacement deck finished, I decided I liked the look of the wood deck flush with the edges of the steel underframe. So I trimmed the edges of the wooden deck castings so they would fit flush with the car sides. I made a few light passes with my knife the full length of the deck. Then I deepened the individual cuts between the stake pockets to remove the excess. Now it's time to distress the wood decks, and this is a great example of why I like to start with cheap model cars. If I totally destroy a model, I'm only out the $1 or so I paid, plus any time I've spent to this point. That gives me the courage to try something this radical. I started by scoring the wooden decks with my very fine-tooth razor saw. I used the saw at a variety of angles to get different effects, and I was careful to follow the direction of the cast wooden planks as I scored the plastic. I learned this technique from a video by Jason Hill. I have provided a link to his video in the description below this video. Be sure to check it out. Notice that I mounted the original wood decks back on the car bodies for this operation. That provided support for the deck and ensured I didn't break off any of the tabs on the underside. When I finished distressing the decks, I removed them from the car bodies for painting. There are 3 benefits to this technique. First, you can vary the amount of wear and tear on your flat car decks to suit your needs. Second, this keeps your flat cars from looking all the same. And third, in a hobby which often requires a lot of precision and care, it's nice to find a task that you can attack with gusto and with no need for precision. Before I primed the decks, I glued a brake wheel ratchet plate to each deck. Then I primed the entire deck using Tamiya light gray primer. When the primer was dry, I painted the deck with successive washes, allowing each wash to dry before applying the next. If you don't let each wash dry thoroughly, you'll end up with a single muddy color. The first wash was a medium gray. This color is very close to the primer color, as you can see. The second wash was a very dark gray. The color is called wrought iron. Once that wash had dried, the deck was a noticeably uneven gray color. I used apple barrel khaki for the third wash. I wanted just a hint of raw wood color. The fourth wash was black. I thinned the black paint with water and alcohol to ensure the pigment would carry into all of the crevices I had created in the distressing step. Once that wash was dry, I coated the entire deck with plain water, and I dabbed washes of dark gray, burnt sienna, and burnt umber to simulate stains on the deck resulting from carrying loads. Finally, I painted the brake ratchet plate a medium rust color. Here is a comparison of the original deck with my distressed and painted deck. I was pleased with the appearance, so I gave the remaining 3 decks the same treatment. I tried to vary the amount of distressing on each of the 4 decks. Once the decks were painted, I started work on the car bodies. First, I drilled out the truck mounting holes to 3/16" diameter. Then I glued in a short length of 3/16 styrene tube. When the glue had cured, I cut the tube flush with the bolster face and the car floor. Then I inserted a short length of 1/8" tube. I left about 1 millimeter of tube extending beyond the bolster face. This will act as a truck kingpin. I made sure the inner tube did not protrude above the car floor. This ensures the car weight will sit flush to the floor. Next, I drilled coupler mounting holes at each end of the car. I used a number 68 bit to drill a pilot hole. Then I used a number 50 bit to drill the final hole. I mounted the trucks and couplers and checked the coupler height. This is the time to add shims to the coupler mount if necessary. When I was satisfied with the coupler height, I removed the trucks and couplers and proceeded with detailing the car. I had to install retaining pieces to one car floor to keep the weight from shifting during operation and handling. There are pins on the underside of the deck pieces, but since I fabricated my own wooden deck for the 4th car, I had to devise a different means of holding the weight in place. I installed 18-inch straight grab irons at all corners of the cast body to replace the cast-on grabs I removed earlier. I used these cast brass stirrup steps from Owl Mountain models. They're a little expensive, $7 for a set of 5, but they're incredibly realistic. Like all brass castings, these might be slightly deformed during the unmolding process. You'll need to gently straighten them before they can be mounted on the car. If you prefer a less expensive part, use the Tyco straight side mount steps. In either case, you'll need to glue the steps to the car with super glue. I primed the car bodies using Tamiya light gray primer and painted them using True Color black paint. You'll want to use a car color appropriate to the railroad you're modeling. From this point on, you'll need to handle the car very carefully because the stirrup steps are easily damaged. I used Champ decal sets HN4 and HD7 to apply lettering and numbers to my flat cars. Once the decals were dry, I sealed them with 2 light sprays of dull coat. Then I weathered the car bodies using the same gray wash technique I described in my video, building a flat car from a red caboose kit. When I was happy with the appearance of the car bodies, I snapped the decks into place. Don't forget to insert the weights between the decks and the car body. And I installed the trucks, the couplers, and the painted brake wheels and staffs. And here is the string of completed flat cars, headed by the red caboose kit-built flat car. I think you can see that it takes just a little time, a little patience, and a few fairly inexpensive parts to turn a cheap model into a great-looking, realistic freight car. In the description below this video, you'll find links to many of the products and tools I've mentioned. I love to read your comments and to respond to your questions. If you want to see more videos like this one, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.